12-year-old Michael never expected his walk home to end in a life-changing confrontation with the police. What happens next will shock you and inspire you at the same time. Stay tuned until the end to uncover the truth, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. Michael adjusted the straps of his backpack as he walked home from school along the edge of the town's lake. It was his usual route, quiet, scenic, and a chance to clear his mind after a long day. The water rippled gently under the late afternoon sun, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees lining the path. Despite the beauty of the scene, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He was used to it. Being one of the few black kids in the predominantly white suburban town of Ashford meant dealing with curious or judgmental stares wherever he went. On the opposite side of the street, 3 uniformed police officers stood near their patrol car. Laughter and low voices carried across the quiet street as they leaned against the vehicle. Among them was Lieutenant Bradley Davis, his large frame exuding authority, and his face permanently set in a sneer. Beside him, Sergeant Harvey Sloan looked as though he belonged in a war zone rather than a small town, his cold blue eyes scanning Michael like a predator. The youngest, Officer Ted Collins, seemed eager to impress his superiors, his nervous energy palpable even from a distance. Davis nudged Sloan with his elbow. "What do we have here?" he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "A little criminal in training, I bet." Sloan chuckled, folding his arms across his chest. "Kid like that? Out here alone? Bet you a donut he's up to no good." Collins hesitated, glancing between the 2 senior officers. "Maybe he's just heading home," he offered weakly, but his words were met with derisive laughter. "Home?" Davis smirked. "With that shiny uniform and a backpack full of God knows what? Nah, Collins, that's not a kid heading home. That's a suspect." Michael noticed their stares but kept his head high, just as his father had taught him. "Don't ever let them make you feel small, son," his father's voice echoed in his mind. "You owe no one an explanation for existing." As he approached the crosswalk near the lake, the officers exchanged looks and began to move. Their boots thudded against the pavement, an ominous rhythm that made Michael's heart pound. He tried to focus on the path ahead, but the sound grew louder, closer, until they were directly behind him. "Hey, kid," Davis called out, his voice sharp. "Hold up." Michael stopped, turning slowly to face the officers. He stood straight, his chin slightly raised, despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "Good afternoon, officers," he said politely. Davis narrowed his eyes, taking a step closer. "Afternoon, huh? What are you doing out here, boy? Skipping school? Looking for trouble?" Michael shook his head. "I'm just walking home from school." Sloan circled him, his boots crunching against the gravel path. "Walking home? In that getup? Looks like someone's got a rich daddy. What's in the bag, huh? Stolen goods?" "It's just books and homework," Michael replied, his voice steady but quiet. Davis snorted. "Books, huh? Let's see about that. Hand it over." Michael hesitated. "I don't think you have a reason to—" Before he could finish, Sloan grabbed the backpack off his shoulders and unzipped it roughly. Books, notebooks, and school supplies spilled onto the ground. Sloan kicked a math book toward the lake's edge and held up a pencil case like it was evidence in a trial. "Fancy stuff for a kid like you," Sloan sneered. "Where'd you get the money for all this? Bet you stole it." "I didn't steal anything," Michael said, his fists clenching at his sides. "My dad bought all of it." Davis chuckled darkly. "Oh yeah? And what's your dad do? Bet he's a dealer or something. That how you afford this fancy gear?" Michael's jaw tightened. My father's a federal agent." For a moment there was silence. Then the officers burst into laughter. "Federal agent?" Collins managed between chuckles. "That's a good one." "Yeah, right," Davis said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm the president." "Listen, kid, lying's not going to help you here." Michael bit his tongue, trying to keep his composure. His father's advice rang in his ears again. In the face of injustice, your dignity is your greatest weapon. But the officers weren't done. Sloan leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "You think you're better than us, huh? With your fancy books and your federal agent daddy? Newsflash, boy. You're nothing. Just another punk who thinks he's untouchable." Michael felt the weight of their words, but refused to look away. "I'm not lying," he said quietly. Davis smirked. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you." He kicked one of Michael's notebooks into the water and nodded toward the lake. "You like that spot? How about we give you a closer look?" Michael's stomach sank. "What are you talking about?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just let him go. He's a kid." "Shut it, Collins," Davis snapped. "He needs to learn some respect." Sloan grabbed Michael by the arm, his grip bruising. "Let's see if you can swim, smart guy." Michael struggled, trying to pull away, but Sloan shoved him toward the water's edge. Davis followed, his laughter echoing in the quiet evening air. Collins hesitated, glancing around, but ultimately didn't intervene. "Come on, boy," Sloan said mockingly. "Show us what you're made of." Michael's heart raced as they pushed him closer to the lake. He glanced over his shoulder, hoping someone, anyone, would see what was happening. But the path was empty, save for an elderly woman selling hot dogs by the roadside. Her worried gaze met his, but she didn't move. Davis shoved Michael hard, and he stumbled, barely catching himself before the water. "Oops," Davis said, smirking. "Looks like you're clumsy too." Michael took a deep breath, his father's voice grounding him. "Never let them take your center, son. Stay calm. Stay strong." But when Sloan grabbed his other arm, Michael knew they wouldn't stop. The cold realization hit him. He was alone. Michael struggled against the firm grip of Sergeant Sloan, but the man's strength was overwhelming. His arms ached as the officer tightened his hold, practically lifting him off the ground. Lieutenant Davis stood nearby, smirking with an air of triumph, while Officer Collins hovered awkwardly behind them, his eyes darting between the boy and his colleagues. The lake shimmered in the fading sunlight, its surface deceptively calm. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as the officers dragged him closer to the water. His mind raced with panic, but he tried to hold on to the lessons his father had instilled in him. "Please," Michael said, trying to steady his voice. "I didn't do anything wrong. Just let me go." Davis laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Didn't do anything wrong? You're out here with stolen goods, lying about your daddy being some big-shot agent. You think we're just gonna let you walk away?" Sloan leaned in, his breath reeking of coffee and something sour. "You need to learn a lesson, boy. Think you're better than us? Think you can talk your way out of this? Time to see how tough you really are." Michael gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him cry. He glanced at Officer Collins, whose expression betrayed unease. "Please," Michael said, addressing him directly. "You don't have to do this. You know this isn't right." Collins shifted uncomfortably, his hands twitching at his sides. "Maybe we should just let him go," he muttered. "He's just a kid and—" "Shut your mouth," Davis snapped, his tone icy. "You want to end up on traffic duty? Do as you're told, rookie." Sloan grinned, dragging Michael closer to the edge. "Let's see if he can swim," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Michael planted his feet, trying to resist, but Sloan's grip was like iron. "Stop!" Michael shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. "You don't have to do this." Davis stepped forward, towering over him. "Oh, we don't have to," he said with a sneer, "but we want to. You need to know your place, boy. Always have, always will." With a sudden shove, Sloan pushed Michael forward. His shoes slipped on the damp grass, and before he could regain his balance, he was airborne. The icy water swallowed him whole, the shock stealing the air from his lungs. For a moment, everything was chaos. The cold enveloped him, seeping into his clothes and skin, making every movement a struggle. His heart raced as he kicked frantically, desperate to surface. The muffled sound of laughter reached his ears, distorted by the water. When Michael's head broke through the surface, he gasped for air, his chest heaving. The officers stood at the edge, laughing and pointing. Davis leaned forward, cupping his hands around his mouth to shout, "Come on, swimmer, show us what you've got." Sloan smirked. "Bet he's regretting all those lies now." Michael's limbs felt heavy, the weight of his soaked clothes pulling him down. He fought to keep his head above water, his arms and legs burning with effort. He thought of his father, the pride in his eyes whenever Michael accomplished something difficult. "You're stronger than you think, son," his father's words echoed in his mind. "Never give up." From the corner of his eye, Michael spotted the elderly hot dog vendor watching from a distance. Her small frame was still, but her eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Unbeknownst to the officers, her cart concealed a hidden camera, its lens capturing every detail. "Hey, rookie," Davis said, turning to Collins. "You think he's learned his lesson yet?" Collins hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I think we've gone far enough. He's just a kid." Davis's expression darkened. "What did I say about back talk? You don't get to decide when we're done." Sloan chuckled, pulling out his phone and pretending to take a picture. "Maybe we should post this online. Local kid gets a swimming lesson. What do you think?" Michael's chest tightened with a mix of exhaustion and humiliation. He kicked harder, forcing himself to stay afloat. The laughter of the officers echoed in his ears, each word a reminder of their cruelty. "Help!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Somebody, please!" "Save your breath," Davis called out mockingly. "No one's coming for you." But Davis was wrong. At that very moment, the hidden camera on the hot dog cart transmitted the live feed to a secure server. Mavis Zoe, the elderly vendor, had been working with the FBI for months, documenting suspicious activity near the lake. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Agent Smith," she said, her Cockney accent crisp and steady, "you'd better get down here. Your boy's in trouble." Miles away, Marcus Smith stared at his phone in disbelief. His son's name and the urgency in Zoe's voice ignited a fire within him. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, his heart pounding with fear and anger. Back at the lake, Michael felt his strength fading. The officers showed no signs of relenting, their laughter filling the air like a cruel symphony. Just as his arms began to falter, a voice cut through the chaos. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" It was a jogger, a middle-aged man who had stumbled upon the scene. He stood frozen in shock, his phone already recording. The officers exchanged glances, their smug expressions faltering. "Nothing to see here," Davis said, stepping forward. "Move along." The jogger didn't budge. "That kid's drowning. Get him out of there." Sloan scowled. "Mind your business, pal, before you end up in the water, too." Michael used the distraction to propel himself toward the shore. His fingers clawed at the muddy bank as he struggled to pull himself out. His entire body trembled from the cold and fear, but he refused to stop. As the officers turned back toward him, their expressions darkened. "Looks like he's tougher than we thought," Davis muttered. But before they could make another move, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. Sloane's grin disappeared. Davis cursed under his breath. Colin's face went pale. Michael collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. In the distance, the elderly vendor stood with her phone pressed to her ear, her gaze unwavering. The sirens grew louder, and for the first time Michael felt a flicker of hope. The air was thick with tension as the sirens drew closer. Michael lay on the grass, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His soaked clothes clung to him, and the chill of the lake's water made his entire body shiver. Despite the cold and exhaustion, he kept his head high, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Never let them see you break, son. Your dignity is your shield." The officers exchanged uneasy glances as the sirens grew deafeningly loud. Lieutenant Davis straightened his posture, his face twisting into a scowl as the first unmarked black SUV skidded to a stop nearby. Several other vehicles followed, their doors flinging open almost in unison. Out stepped agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, their presence commanding and purposeful. At the center of the group was Marcus Smith, Michael's father. His sharp suit and calm demeanor radiated authority, but his eyes betrayed a storm of anger. He scanned the scene, his gaze locking onto Michael, who was still sprawled on the ground. Without hesitation, Marcus sprinted toward his son, kneeling beside him. "Michael!" Marcus's voice was filled with a mix of relief and fury. He helped his son sit up, his hands gentle but firm. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Michael nodded weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." Marcus clenched his jaw, his eyes flicking to the three officers who now stood stiffly, their confidence visibly shaken. Lieutenant Davis stepped forward, his attempt at authority undermined by the sweat on his brow. "What's going on here?" Davis demanded, his voice rising. "This is a routine patrol. We were just questioning a suspect." Marcus rose slowly, his imposing presence silencing Davis mid-sentence. "A suspect?" Marcus's voice was calm but laced with icy precision. "That suspect is my son. You had no reason to touch him, no probable cause to detain him, and certainly no justification to throw him into a lake." Sloane scoffed, trying to recover his bravado. "We were just doing our job. The kid was acting suspicious." Marcus's expression darkened. "Suspicious? Because he's black? Because he dared to walk home from school? Is that what you call policing?" Collins, the youngest of the group, took a hesitant step back, his face pale. Davis, however, wasn't ready to back down. "Listen, Agent Smith," he sneered, "we don't have to explain ourselves to you. This is our jurisdiction." Marcus took a step closer to Davis, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Not anymore." Behind Marcus, one of the FBI agents approached with a tablet in hand. "Sir," the agent said, her voice crisp, "we've secured the live feed from the surveillance camera. It's all here, every word, every action." The color drained from Davis's face. "Surveillance?" he stammered. From her position near the hot dog cart, Mavis Zoe stepped forward. She held her phone high, her face resolute. "That's right," she said, her Cockney accent cutting through the tension. "I saw the whole bloody thing, and I made sure it's all on tape." Sloane turned to her, his expression a mix of anger and panic. "You don't know what you're talking about, lady. This is police business." Mavis didn't flinch. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, and so does the camera on my cart. You lot thought you could get away with this, didn't you? Thought no one would care about a boy like him." She pointed at Michael. "Well, you were wrong." Marcus motioned for the FBI agents to proceed. "Arrest them," he said, his tone final. The agents moved swiftly, placing Davis, Sloan, and Collins in handcuffs. Davis resisted, his face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this. We're officers of the law." Marcus leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "And you're corrupt officers who just assaulted a minor. You've abused your power for the last time." Collins didn't fight as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "I didn't want to do it," he murmured. "I told them it was wrong." "No one forced you to stay silent," Marcus replied coldly. "Your inaction made you complicit." Sloan, however, was less subdued. "You think this is over?" he spat as he was dragged toward one of the SUVs. "You've got no idea who you're messing with." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Marcus said, watching as the officers were loaded into the vehicles. "And I know how to deal with men like you." With the officers secured, Marcus returned to Michael, who was now wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the agents. "It's over now," Marcus said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Michael looked up at his father, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "They called you a liar, Dad," he said quietly. "They said you weren't really an agent." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They've spent their whole careers underestimating people like us. But today, they learned the truth." Nearby, Mavis watched the scene with a sense of satisfaction. She stepped closer, addressing Marcus. "You've got yourself a brave lad there," she said, her voice warm. "He didn't let them break him." Marcus nodded, his pride evident. "He's stronger than they'll ever understand." As the FBI vehicles began to pull away, the crowd that had gathered around the scene erupted into cheers. People recorded the moment on their phones, capturing the rare sight of justice being served in real time. Marcus helped Michael to his feet, keeping an arm around his son as they walked toward the waiting car. Michael glanced back at the lake, its surface now calm and serene. For a moment, he thought about the fear and humiliation he had felt, but then he looked up at his father and felt a surge of hope. "Are they really going to pay for what they did?" Michael asked. Marcus's expression was firm. "Yes, son, they will, and this is just the beginning." The courtroom was packed, the weight of anticipation heavy in the air. Michael sat at the witness stand, his back straight, his hands resting on his lap. He wore a neatly pressed suit, making him appear older than his 12 years, but his young face betrayed a mix of nervousness and determination as he prepared to recount the events that had brought him here. Across the room, Lieutenant Davis, Sergeant Sloan, and Officer Collins sat at the defense table, their faces a mixture of defiance and unease. The courtroom's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on their features, making their expressions seem even more severe. Behind them, their defense attorney shuffled through papers, ready to discredit the testimony of a boy who had dared to stand against them. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor Wright, rose from her seat. Her British accent cut through the silence as she addressed the courtroom. "Michael Smith," she began, her tone steady and measured. "Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened on the afternoon of May 15th? Michael took a deep breath, his gaze flickering briefly to his father, Marcus, who sat in the front row. Marcus gave him a small nod, his expression filled with quiet pride and encouragement. Michael looked back at the prosecutor and began to speak. "I was walking home from school," he said, his voice clear but soft. "I take the path by the lake every day. It's quiet, and I like the view. That day, I noticed 3 officers watching me from across the street." Eleanor nodded. "And what happened next?" "They started following me," Michael continued. "At first, I thought maybe they were just walking the same way, but then one of them called out to me. They told me to stop." "And did you stop?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," Michael said. "My dad always taught me to be respectful to police officers, so I stopped and said, 'Good afternoon.' But they didn't respond the same way." Michael's voice wavered slightly, but he pushed through. "They started asking me questions, where I was going, what I was doing there. One of them said I looked suspicious." "And how did you respond?" Eleanor asked, her tone gentle but probing. "I told them I was just walking home from school," Michael said, "but they didn't believe me. They took my backpack and started going through it. They threw my books on the ground near the lake." As he spoke, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor held up a hand to quiet the audience before turning back to Michael. "And what did they say when they went through your things?" Michael hesitated, his hands tightening on his lap. "They said I must have stolen them because someone like me couldn't afford nice things." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Across the room, Davis shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Sloane's gaze remained fixed on the table in front of him, while Collins looked away entirely. Eleanor's voice softened. "Michael, can you tell us what happened next?" Michael's gaze dropped briefly before he lifted it again, meeting her eyes. "They grabbed me," he said quietly. "They said I needed to learn a lesson. Then they pushed me into the lake." Gasps echoed through the room and the judge banged her gavel to restore order. Eleanor stepped closer to Michael, her expression one of quiet resolve. "And when you were in the water, what did they do?" "They laughed," Michael said, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "They stood there and laughed." Eleanor turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this boy was humiliated, dehumanized, and endangered by the very people sworn to protect him. But his courage in standing here today is a testament to his strength and to the truth." The defense attorney rose, his southern drawl dripping with sarcasm. "Mr. Smith, isn't it true that your father is a federal agent?" "Yes," Michael said. "And isn't it also true," the attorney continued, "that your father has been investigating corruption within the police force? Isn't it possible that this entire situation has been exaggerated to aid his investigation?" Michael met the attorney's gaze without flinching. "No, sir. What happened to me wasn't exaggerated. It was real." The attorney smirked. "Real convenient, isn't it, that your dad just happened to be nearby when this supposedly happened?" Michael's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his composure. "What would be convenient," he said evenly, "is if I could walk home from school without being treated like a criminal." The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of Michael's words striking everyone in the room. Eleanor stepped forward once more. "No further questions, Your Honor." The next witness was Mavis Zoe, the elderly hot dog vendor who had recorded the incident. Her testimony was concise and damning, detailing every moment she had captured on her hidden camera. When the prosecution played the video, the courtroom watched in stunned silence as Davis, Sloane, and Collins's actions were laid bare. The final blow came when Officer Collins, now cooperating with the prosecution, took the stand. His voice was shaky, but his words were clear. "I didn't stop them," he admitted, his Canadian accent thick with guilt. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop them. And for that, I'm sorry." The defense tried to discredit him, but Collins's testimony combined with the video evidence left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. As the judge announced the sentences, 20 years for Davis and Sloan, 10 for Collins with a reduction for cooperation, the courtroom erupted into cheers. Michael turned to his father, tears streaming down his face. "We did it, Dad," he whispered. "We really did it." Marcus pulled him into a tight embrace. "You did it, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood up for yourself, for all of us." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, their cheers echoing through the streets. Michael and Marcus stepped out together, the young boy holding his father's hand. For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael felt safe. And more importantly, he felt seen. As they walked away from the courthouse, Michael glanced back at the building, a small smile playing on his lips. This was only the beginning. Together, they had made a stand. And together, they would keep fighting for justice. Michael's story reminds us that courage and determination can bring about real change. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and where you're watching from. And be sure to check out the next video. We've got more powerful stories waiting for you.